Well, hello everyone again. Welcome to this next episode of meQuanics. Thanks for joining in. This one was quite quick after our last episode with Michael Brett of Q Branch, and that's for a very specific reason. We've tried to time this well because we have another quantum game in the landscape to join several of the others, including meQuanics. And this one's being produced by Dr. James Wootton from the University of Basel in Switzerland, and he has joined us today to give us a bit of a rundown of what his project is and hopefully get some more of you involved. So James, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. So
first of all, as I generally like to do, is give the listeners a bit of a brief CV, sort of how you got into this, what's your background, and then we'll get started talking about your specific project, which, as I mentioned, is another quantum game.
Yep. So, well, my CV is probably one of the example of one of the main routes to the field. So I got a a degree in physics, and then I did that was just a bachelor's, and I did a master's by research, and I chose for that a project in quantum information. It was on anonymous broadcasting, which actually we should have a paper out eventually. 10 years after I did my master's, we might have a paper out on that. And then I went up to the University of Leeds with Dr. Yanis Pachos, and he was getting into topological quantum computation at the time, so using anyons, particles known as anyons, to do quantum computation. And so that's how I got into that field. And I've mostly been working in quantum error correction with anyons ever since. So then I moved here to Basel as a postdoc.
And so you've basically come to my attention because you're another player now in this sort of quantum game landscape with this new project called Decodoku. And this is also, it's quite close to meQuanics in that it's based on the same model of quantum computation. So give us a bit of a rundown of just the idea behind this and how you sort of came about deciding to turn this into a game.
Well, the story behind me coming up with the idea of a game was I was at a conference in a ROSA. I like to say this is the best quantum idea that anyone's ever had in a ROSA, beating Schrödinger and his wave equation. Someone from the technology transfer asked me if there's any inventions I might be able to contribute to them, and I sort of laughed in their face because I'm a theorist. In quite the abstract corner of theory. But then I started thinking, and I realized that I could gamify some of the research and get people involved in it like that. So it's based on quantum error correction, which is a device that we would build to find clues about the errors that happen in a quantum computer, and then use those clues to try and work out what errors happened and undo them. So I think oh, sorry. Yeah, I can't hear you. So
sorry, we're getting just a little bit of feedback through your mic. I don't know if you can switch it on or off, or if there's something that's coming through.
Yeah, it's. I should probably put headphones in.
It's a bit of a hiss coming through. The last time that happened, we got people saying that they were annoyed.
And I'll turn the fan off as well, so we should be nice and perfectly sound.
Yeah, no, it's still coming through, unfortunately.
Okay. So what is it? Is it a hiss?
It's just a bit of a buzz that's coming through while you're talking.
Right, it could. Okay. Let me just try and work that out.
I mean, we can always just go off. Well, you can just sort of log off and then log back on. No, I can edit all this out later, and I can fill the gaps for people who are listening live.
Yeah. I think it's probably the fan on my MacBook.
It just started kicking in about 3 minutes after we started talking.
Yeah, it's probably the fan on my MacBook, unfortunately. So the mic on my MacBook must be working, even though it's been told to be turned off. So it's working as well as the other one. So I can give it a bit more air. No.
I mean, we might just have to deal with it, and I'll just have to try and edit this out later before I upload it.
Yeah.
I mean, it happened a few episodes ago with Rod as well, so not sure what's the cause.
So I'll change the way it's sitting a bit, so it gets more ventilation. But other than that, I'm not sure what I can do because I told it not to listen to that mic and it ignores me.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll just have to keep going, and I'll try and edit it out and re-upload the YouTube video. So apologies for those who are listening live, but we'll try and clean up the audio again afterwards. So sorry, as you were saying, this was related to error decoding in quantum computing.
Yeah.
And
so,
sorry, keep going.
Also, yeah, I was just saying something to fill the silence.
Okay. So this is based on these surface code models of quantum computation. So the error decoding process is an active process. It's sort of the main way in which a classical computer would interact with a quantum computer. So what is, I mean, are you getting active feedback from the game itself? Are you collecting data?
So the approach that we want to take is to encourage people to be researchers rather than taking data from them. So it's not one of these, it's not a sort of project where we're taking data and using it to do our own research. It's a project where we're encouraging people to do their research. Because I think the data that we get wouldn't be all that useful in this specific problem. But what would be useful is people telling us their methods. So we really want to know what people are thinking while they're playing the game, and that's not something that we can really collect data for without them actually telling us. So we encourage people to tell us, and we have, for example, a survey that people can fill in, especially it's geared towards the game Decodoku puzzles, and they can use that to take a few specific examples of problems that normal computers are very bad at, or our current algorithms are very bad at, and then they can tell us how they have used their human brains to work out what should be done.
So give us a bit of a rundown of how this works. So we mentioned just before we started talking online that you can actually screen share for us a little bit here and give us a bit of a rundown of the actual app itself. So why don't we...
So let's do that. And now let's fire it up. So there you saw under the hood in Unity. So this is the game Decodoku. We have two apps, Decodoku and Decodoku Puzzles. What this one does is it really simulates active error correction in that you have this grid. So these small squares here are qubits. Errors will happen on them, and they cause these numbers as a trace of the errors. And so, for example, an error has probably happened there, making this 8 and a 2. So errors will also always create groups of numbers that add up to a multiple of 10 in this specific model. So there's probably one there giving us an 8 and a 2, one there and one there giving us a 6 and a 4, and so on. And then we correct the errors by working out the groups in which they were created and getting rid of them. But over time, more errors come, so you've got to try and keep on top of it, which can get a bit complicated. So if you've decided that this is a group that's been created by a certain set of errors, you can tap on them and give them a color to kind of keep track of what's going on.
So explain the numbering system a bit more as to how it's numbered.
How the numbers work.
Yeah, so what dictates the numbers and what dictates how you pair them up?
So these are 10-level qubits in here. So everything's based on the number 10 for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
Now, So then you can define a measurement for all of these qubits. So you look at them and you do a weird quantum measurement, and it will tell you where, a number from 0 to 9. If it's 0, that means everything's fine, so we don't reproduce the zeros.
Right.
But otherwise, it's a signature that errors have happened. So if you have an error here, it can disturb these two. It will disturb this qubit, and you'll see that when you make measurements on these two squares. In that one of them will turn into, say, a 3. It will be disturbed, so it goes from a 0 to a 3, and that kind of error is always happens, so that this one will be disturbed, so it goes from a 0 to a 7. So you always get them adding up to a multiple of 10. But if you have one that hits, so here we might have had a 3 and a 7, then we had another error here. Well, actually, what happened? If you rewind the video, there was a 9 and a 1 here, I think. And then another error happens here, and of course this one, the kind of decay, because we think of these as particles, it kind of decayed into a 3 and an 8. So multiples of 10 are essentially 0 in this game. So 3 add 8 is 11, which is essentially the same as 1. So that 1 has decayed into a 3 and 8. So I get quite technical, I suppose, but does that make sense?
Yeah, so in this case, as you said, you're dealing with what's known as qubits rather than qubits. So far, we've on all the discussions that we've had on this podcast, everyone talks about qubits. So maybe a bit more of a background as to what these qubits are.
So a qubit is a quantum version of a bit. So this is just retreading old ground. So you've got two possible states, 0 and 1, but you can also have superpositions of that. But why just 0 and 1? Why not 0, 1 and 2? Why not 0, 1, 2 and 3, and so on? So technologically, it can be challenging to make these systems with higher numbers of states, but you might be able to get some extra power out of them, some extra efficiency from them. So some people do look at these possibilities where you would have 0, 1, or 2 and superpositions of them, and that would be called a 3-level qubit. And then 0, 1, and 4, 0, 1, 2, and 3 would be a 4-level qubit. And here we've used 10-level qubits, so everything is based on the number 10, basically because people know multiples of 10. You will know from your own game that, and your own research that error correction for surface codes based on qubits is actually quite advanced at the moment. We have really fantastic algorithms, but error correction for qubit surface codes is nowhere near as advanced. So we have actually quite poor algorithms, and they're quite heuristic, and that's why we think people who are playing this game can help us find better qubit algorithms.
So when you say algorithms, you're not talking about a quantum algorithm, you're talking about this decoding algorithm.
Yeah, so you've got your quantum computer, and then bolted onto the side of that, you've got a classical computer whose job it is to look at what errors are happening, look at the clues as to what errors are happening in the quantum computer, and figure out how to help the quantum computer out. So we need a method to tell that normal computer what to do when it sees, for example, this. And it will see, okay, these three numbers all belong to the same group, they will create the same errors, let's get rid of them, and so on. I could be playing the game here rather than just leaving it.
So that's what these numbers represent. It's basically when we make a measure on these qubits, we're selecting out one of these 10 possible states that a qubit could be in, and the errors sum, or at least when they occur in pairs, they sum to 10 because, well, the measurement on one side is clearly influenced by errors, the measurement on the other side, and it's sort of complementary to each other.
Yeah, because both of these measurements, the measurement here and the measurement here, both involve this qubit, that's been detected. So what I've done here is put on a training game. So what a training game does is, in the normal game, all of the numbers are the same color unless you decide to change them. In a training game, it shows you the difference between all of the different groups by colour, so you can see what's going on sort of under the hood here. So we can see these two are grey, so they were created by this an error. Well, they were created by the same set of errors. They could have been here, here, and here, but it's probably there. These green ones were also created by the same set of errors, and these ones as well. So in this game, you basically have to move errors of numbers of the same colour together in order to correct the errors. It doesn't matter if you do it in an awkward way. It's rather inefficient, but you can if you want. But yeah, and this we can see how the errors grow over time. You can see that over time these italic, well, dark red, I suppose, I'm not very good at colours, are getting bigger and bigger, so we really need to deal with these if we want to stop our errors getting out of hand. Because we need all of the errors to stay, we need all of these groups to stay quite small so that it's manageable for our...
James, this is, sorry to interrupt you again, this feedback is getting progressively worse.
Okay.
Is there a possibility if you just leave the chat, reboot your computer, and we'll see what happens?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, it's starting to get incredibly bad. So hopefully if you reboot, it should hopefully clean this up, because it was perfectly fine when we logged on initially together. Okay, it looks as though it's logged off. So yes, for those of you who are watching live, we've now obviously got a bit of a break in transmission. That being said, we certainly have gone very well with the podcast itself already. All of our 13 episodes so far are online, except, unfortunately, still the conversation with the University of Bristol, the CDT students there. The editing is taking me quite a long time to clear up the audio. But hopefully I'll be able to get to that later in the week. The podcast itself, we're hopefully going to slowly, over the next 6 to 12 months, bring in some sort of more professional audio editing and audio equipment in order for both, for things like this not to happen again, where audio gets buzzy or gets hit by feedback quite a lot, and also just to make things a bit more pleasant and a bit more easier to listen to, especially when either a Skype connection or Google Hangouts connection is particularly bad from one side or the other. But aside from that, we do have some interesting guests coming up. Our next podcast should hopefully be with Jake Taylor from the University of Maryland and the Joint Quantum Institute in the US. He's been visiting Japan now for, I think it's 2.5 months. And he'll be able to sit down with us later in the week. This will be another offline conversation, which I'll upload to YouTube and our accounts a bit later. Apart from that, we've got some interesting guests coming up probably in the next month or so from some of the institutes in Europe, Australia and Canada. These will be announced on our Twitter page and on our YouTube channel as time and exact dates become confirmed. But for those of you who are watching or are listening who are in the quantum field, certainly feel free to contact me account or contact me over the YouTube account, because I'm more than happy to set up a conversation. As I said earlier on when we were starting off these podcasts, I'm slowly going to sort of transition from talking about some of the senior professors and some of the group leaders around the world to talking to more sort of the student level or the early postdoc level. I mean, these are the people that I think do some of the most interesting work from the ground level kind of work that really dictates how this technology and how this stuff evolves. Hopefully, James will get back, log in with us soon. I'm finding it a bit difficult in order to fill the empty air at this point. Aside from that, we have some announcements that will shortly be made on our Twitter account regarding another possible spin-off company that we're looking at. Oh, looks like James is back. James.
Now, how's that?
That has cleaned it right up.
So hopefully it will remain that way.
So what we might do is we'll just take it from the top again for this sort of demo about the game, and then I'll re-edit and all this up offline, just so so people can actually.
Unfortunate enough to be here live.
No, it sometimes happens. Obviously, if you catch it and try to solve the problem, it makes it a bit easier. So, okay, well, we'll basically do what we just did again.
So is it still fine?
Yeah, it's fine at the moment.
Okay, so the fan has come back on and it is no longer affecting us. So
yeah, so it must have been something else, something contaminating the optical fiber between here.
I did a few settings and whatnot to try and. I've already told it not to use the onboard fan, the onboard mic, but I told it again in a different way. I have to do this with computers sometimes.
Yeah, you can never control it. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. It's really annoying.
Right. So apologies that I'm spending a few moments plugging things in.
No, that's fine.
But other than that, let's go back to Unity.
Okay, that's cleaned up a lot better, so we can actually hear you clearly now.
Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna start this little tutorial again on Decodoku.
Yeah. So let's maybe this time. Oh, well, I shouldn't say this time because we could pretend on the edit that this is the only time there ever was.
Yes, this is the first time we did it.
Yeah, there totally wasn't a time with a bad mic. So so here's a training game. So what a training game does is it gives you lots of groups of numbers, and they're all in different colors, and they all add up to a multiple of 10. So this is a surface code based on qubits. And so shall I say what qubits are again?
Yeah, let's explain what qubits are again compared to qubits.
Yeah, so qubits are, as you've been talking about before, are two-level systems. They can be 0 or 1 or any quantum superposition thereof. But why stop at 1? You can also do 0, 1, or 2. That would be called a free-level qubit. Now, these are harder to engineer physically, but in terms of algorithms, they could be more efficient. So there could be reasons to go up to qubits. So, for example, with a classical computer, there was some designed based on free-level like bits, -1, 0, and 1, and they were regarded as a much better architecture, but they weren't the ones that we eventually started using. So here we use 10-level qubits, so everything is based on the number 10. The qubits are represented by these small squares, and this is a quantum error correcting code. Many qubits all acting together to try and make one big, basically logical qubit for something stored in this whole thing that is clean. So what will happen is that an error will occur, say here, and that will affect this qubit. So what we do is measurements around each of these squares, and that will tell us something about how the errors have affected all of the qubits around that square. So this is probably a bad example because it's an edge one, but it looks at all of the errors around that square and tells you basically how much they all add up to. So here there's been a type of error on this square, this qubit, sorry, which when this square looked at it, it saw something's happened, and I assigned that the number 1. If it assigned it the number 0, that means nothing happens, but it's seen something's happened, which I assigned the number 1. And this one also sees it because it also has this qubit, but it's defined such that it assigns it the number 9, and these numbers, it's not a coincidence, add up to 10. Here we have a couple of errors very close to each other. There'll probably be one there and one there. So this one has affected these two, this one has affected these two, and the sum total is that they all add up to a multiple of 10, so 7 add 2 add 1 is 10. So what probably happened is that an error happened here, which made a 7 and a 3, and then an error happened there that cracked that 3 into a 2 and a 1. And these ones here add up to 20. So if we want to clean up these errors, we just go around moving these numbers together and adding them up, and any multiple of 10 will disappear. So if we add this 7 to this 9, for example, that makes 16, of course, but the 10 disappears and just gives us a 6, and then the 6 and the 4 become a 10, so they disappear. Although we've just seen that more things have happened. So in a quantum computer, errors happen over time, and we have to keep track of them. We have to keep actively trying to get rid of them, keeping a record of what they've done. So we have to keep on getting rid of what we've seen, and but we know that more ones will come. Now, this game is defined, well, it's a game, so it's not defined in quite the same regime as a working quantum computer. It's defined in a regime where more errors happen than we are able to correct.
Right.
So eventually we are going to fail. So you would actually want to do your quantum computer in a regime where you can correct more errors than happen to give you a nice margin in case something goes spectacularly wrong. But that doesn't make a good game if it goes on for eternity, although it does make a good quantum computer. So
what's dictating the refresh rate? So as new errors come in, does that just happen randomly, or once you've cleaned up all of them?
It's defined that every 5 moves, new errors come in.
And that gets progressively smaller and smaller as you...
So it's every 5 moves, and then basically sort of 6 errors happen every 5 moves. But you only have 5 moves to get rid of 6 errors. So.
And then what point does it sort of, I mean, at what point is it game over? Is there a game over?
Yeah, I've paused here because game over is about to happen. So as more errors come, they will add to existing groups. So for example, this is a small group, just a 5 and a 5. But if another error was to come here, it would maybe split that 5 into a 2 and a 3, and then you'd have a bigger group. And then more errors happen over time, the groups get bigger and bigger. And as you can see, this green group is pretty huge. So it starts here, it ends there. This is an italic green group, so it's slightly different. But once any group spans from top to bottom or left to right, then that is when we say, okay, our groups have got too big, they're unmanageable, it's game over. So if I just say, oh, let's sort out some of these, then eventually something will happen which will bring this so big that it touches from top to bottom.
So what's the difference between the normal text and the italicized text again?
So every different color is a different group, but there are only so many colors, and they're not quite enough for the number of different groups that occur. So italic is basically a different color. So it would be nicer if this turned out to be red, but it turned out to be italic, the same as that one, to make everything a little bit confusing. We can actually induce a game over, because if you were to take, say, this one and add them together, then what you're doing is causing those groups to combine. So this would all then become the same group. So similarly, if we add this one to this one, then the green group and the italicized green group are going to combine, and then game over. So I got a score of 70 there. And apparently I have a high of 5 at the moment, but that's...
Oh, a high of 5. So in the main game itself, you don't give this color coding sort of tutorial or training kind of thing.
It's still... Oh, sorry, I was talking over you there. But it's still a high of 5 because this is a training game. We have the colors just to help us know what's going on under the hood. If you want to actually have your score count, then you need to do this. So if we were in a training game, this would probably be one color, this would be another, that would be another, that would be another, and this would be another. But we have to work these out ourselves now. We have to look at this and say, well, that's a 3 and a 7. They add up to a multiple of 10. They're not really that close to anyone. That's a group. Let's move them together. Here we've got a 7 and a 3. We could say, oh, that's a group. But if we look at it with a greater context, we see that there's another 3 there, and those two add up to a 7. So actually, that guy should go with that guy, and that guy should go with those. And if we were to combine them, that would be a mistake, and it would actually bring these two groups together, which would make a bigger group and be bad. So let's not do that. And you can expect to get, once you have played it a few times, can expect to get a score in the hundreds. So like 100 and something is a typical score at the moment. So yeah, this is me just playing now. I can do this while we discuss other matters.
Oh my God, this feedback has come back again. Yeah, I think this microphone feedback starting to creep back in again.
Right.
Oh, we'll see if it does. Oh no, it might have cleaned itself up. This is strange. So, I mean, we were talking about before, in the case of a qubit surface code,
yeah,
there are methods in order to decode this. So this is a classical problem. This is about how do we take the data that is measured by a quantum computer during error correction and be able to reliably estimate what's going on physically. And that's what it is. It's an estimate. It's a best case guess as to what's happened to the actual qubits. Now, in the qubit case, we can do this efficiently, at least in the sense of the algorithms. They scale nicely. You were mentioning before, when the microphone was quite bad, that in the case of these qubits, these higher level quantum systems, in your game's case, 10-level quantum systems, these algorithms don't exist, or at least they're not efficient.
Yeah. Yeah, they're a lot worse. Well, if you wanted to do it, there's always brute force. So brute force is just where you look at every possible set of errors that could have caused these. So I'm not playing in the game at the moment just because I'm trying to get another screen up. But there's always brute force where you look at every possibility and add up all of the probabilities and you find what's the best thing to do. But there's exponentially many possibilities, so this really isn't a viable option. So you have to use other more heuristic algorithms. So, well, sometimes, as for the qubit case, we can use minimum weight perfect matching, which is this really nice minimization algorithm. But for the qubit cases, we don't have any minimum weight perfect matching generalization to qubits is not efficient. It would still take a lot of time. All of the lovely tricks that we can use to make minimum weight perfect matching efficient, we can unfortunately not use in that case.
So what was so aside from the fact that was that the primary motivation for the development of this game using qubits, is the fact that we just don't have good classical techniques, and therefore, as with most gamified problems, you start with a problem that we know is already difficult. Yeah.
So decoding in the surface code for qubits is difficult, and our methods are heuristic, and that's just a fancy name for we're not really very good at them. And we could just as well make this a puzzle for people to solve and give us some techniques that we maybe haven't thought of, because it's not our scientific training that's really helping us out sometimes when we're developing a heuristic algorithm. It's just our natural human ability to solve problems, and we can use other people's natural human ability.
So in terms of a physical system, to my knowledge, nobody is attempting to build a surface code error-corrected machine out of these qubits. Is there any benefit to doing that?
Well, trapped ions have a lot more levels than are needed for qubits. So trapped ions are quite complicated systems with lots of quantum states in, but they just section out 2 of them to make a qubit, but there's no reason why they can't pick 3 and make a qubit, for example. So the reason why people focus on qubits is just because most of the fields, most of the theory focuses on qubits, and it is easier. But there are people that have done work on how you would do, say, magic state distillation for qubits, and found it does offer some advantages over qubits. So there are reasons that you might want to try out the qubit.
So there are particular resource benefits with potentially using qubits rather than qubits, even though I mean, this benefit would be theoretical in nature because they're still harder systems to engineer.
Yeah, but we're still at the point where we've got to investigate all options, really. Well, it's good, at least theoretically, to investigate all options, and because, as I said, I think before, when the mic wasn't working so well,
and it's just not working again. But it seems to go well, and then it goes bad, and then it goes well again.
Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon. But yeah, there are some who think that we should have used the classical version of qubits to make our normal computers. So, and we missed out by not doing that. And it's so good, something that even we might switch from bits to three-level systems for our normal computers. But
so, I mean, your game itself, at the moment it's a 7x7 grid with a 10-level system. I mean, does your game go larger and larger, or does it basically fix it at that?
We decided to fix it at that specific size, but we'll be looking at developing the ability for more. If a user wants to start going towards higher systems, we'll develop the software that they can do that. But the main app is I think I just booted up the wrong one. Oh, no,
well, it says now on the screen sharing that you win. So what's the winning condition? We talked about the losing condition.
So this is actually a different app. My other one, which I wanted to introduce briefly so I could talk about how we get data from people. This is called Decodoku Puzzles. And this looks at a simpler problem where errors don't keep coming. We just have one set of errors, one bunch of errors, and we have to figure out what they're up to. So in this case, there is a win condition. Right. You can either get it wrong or you can get it right for this specific set. For the other one, it keeps on going over time. So winning just means keeping on going forever. But in this one, there's a more specific winning condition. So in this case, we have a grid of numbers. They're all in groups that add up to a multiple of 10. And here we have squares that we don't know what's going on, and we have to try and work out, given that they're small numbers, they're small groups that add up to a multiple of 10, what's going on in these squares. So we can probably see that that's a 4 in the middle of nowhere next to this. So this is probably a 6. And here we find, so in this one and in the other one, you can click on, oh, that was an accident. You can click on numbers to assign them a color if you wish. And you can use this to try and work out what all of these groups are. You can get rid of the groups by adding them up. And I think that 3 might have belonged to that 7, and then we have a 6 and a 4. And then in the end, we find that there's a 5 in the middle of nowhere, a 4 in the middle of nowhere. Probably that means there is a 5 there. Oh, sorry, that was supposed to be a move. And probably that means there's a 6 there. And then we were right, we win. And it then tells us what all of the groups actually were to tell us why we won or lost.
So you basically, in order to reduce this, you have to solve the puzzle. You don't just say, okay, well, I know that's a 6 and I know that was a 5.
Yeah, you really need the context of everything that's going on to work out. So was this a 3 and then a 7? That's probably another 3. Oh, yeah. I was thinking that 3 belonged to that 7, but actually it's probably that 3, isn't it? This is the kind of thing you have to do. You work out all the groups and you get rid of them. And then, well, hopefully you win. I've not gone into all of the complexities of phi lambda. Maybe I'll leave that for another time. But just to say something on how people can contribute, we have, and I'll have to change my screen share.
Sure.
So hopefully that's the right one. We have a survey online, so you can find this on our website, and this presents some of the kind of puzzles that you might see in the game Decodoku Puzzles, and it's your job to try and work out what's going on. So this isn't the app. If I click, nothing happens. This is just a picture. So you can look at this and try and work out what's going on here. This is one that's particularly bad for our current algorithms to deal with, because you see there's an 8 and a 2 here right next to each other. It's very tempting to think that they belong to each other, and this 1 and a 9 here. But actually, if you look at it more, if you bring together that 8 and a 2, then you'll have this 8 in the middle of nowhere with no 2 near it. And so this is actually one group. This is another group. I'm telling you the answer here. This is another group, and this is another group. So if we were to have a greedy algorithm which brought those together and brought those together, then that would combine these two groups. So now we'd have one big group with this 8 and a 2, one big group with this 8 and a 2, and then we might be tempted to think this 8 and a 2 go together, and we'd bring them together, and then we have a huge group that spans the whole thing. So we've obviously done stuff that's very wrong. So we really need to think more globally and think, okay, I want to put that 8 and a 2 together, but what's that going to mean for that 8 and that 2 if I do that? So we think about these. So you have to think about this, and then you can tell us what you were thinking while you tried to solve this problem.
So I mean, the app itself, does that feed back information to your service, or is it just through these sort of online web pages?
So no data comes through the app, because it's not the moves that people make that's really important, but it's the thoughts behind them. We're encouraging people to do their own research rather than just give us data for our research.
So in that,
and then so there's multiple puzzles like this, which are very bad for our current algorithms, but they'll give us a nice perspective on what people are thinking when they do it.
So how's the feedback working? How do people? Can you actually solve that puzzle, or is that just an image?
So you solve it by, well, you might have to get a pen and paper out to think about it, but it's just an image. You can't. So this is just a Google survey. So if I try and move it around, then as you can see, it doesn't do what it would have done in the app. So you think about it, and then you tell us your answer here. So we've already got a few answers, and someone even wrote it in pseudocode, which was. So we're going to go through all of the contributions that people make, and then we're going to then make blog posts and videos about those and tell people what the community is up to, so that they can take that and build upon it.
So give us a bit of a history of the development of this. I mean, this week you've released, what is it, the second major version?
Yeah, so this week we released Decodoku Puzzles. Well, it's been a few months ago we released Decodoku on the App Store, just to try it out, get people's feedback. I would call it a beta version, but I'm not allowed to call it a beta version because Apple doesn't have beta versions on the App Store.
Right.
So it's a trial version. So we got some feedback on that, and then we started building the Unity version, which deployed on Android as well as iOS. And so that our big release of the Unity version was yesterday. So that's really when everything began. Everything before that is a prequel. Everything began yesterday. That's really when we're inviting people to take part in this research.
So, I mean, what's the ultimate goal is obviously to try to make these decoding algorithms better, and using people's own heuristic processes to tell you how hopefully these algorithms do better. Assuming that happens, I mean, is there a next step, or would you be perfectly happy if that's the final outcome of Decodoku?
So what was that again? Sorry.
So I mean, your ultimate goal is to make use people's methods for solving this to generate a better idea about how to create a decoding algorithm for these QDIT surface codes. Let's assume that happens. Is there an extension to this project? Is there somewhere else to go, or you've got your answer, you're really happy with that, and that's enough?
So it's about getting the answer. It's also about getting people involved in the research and knowing about the research. But once we have better algorithms, then that's basically the scientific goal of the project. We'll add apps on other problems. So specifically in non-abelian anyons, which are very hard to decode, we'll add more on that. But so there'll be more problems within the field to have a go at, but basically we want to get decoding algorithms.
So I can see now that you're playing with a somewhat different version where you've got symbols of alpha and phi on the screen rather than numbers. So what's this? So
this is the non-abelian anyons. So this is we can think of these all of these numbers actually as particles, and two numbers that add up to a multiple of 10 are each other's antiparticles. So a 6 is a particle, we can move it around, and the antiparticle of a 6 is a 4. So we put them together, they disappear. And we can add, if we combine a 2 and a 1, then we get a 3. But also a 3 can decay into a 2 and a 1. Well, that's not an operation that I'm allowed in the game, but that can happen. Now, actually, what kind of particles these are called abelian anyons. So abelian anyons are ones that you always know what happens when you push them together. We always know that a 3 and an 8 will add up to 11, and the 10 will disappear, so it'll give us a 1. But with non-abelian anyons, you don't always know what will happen when they combine. So here's the phi. So these are phi particles. We can move them around. We can combine them. They might annihilate, as they did there, or they might not. So, for example, if I bring these two phi's together, they didn't annihilate. They became a single phi. Also, sometimes when we bring two phi's together, we can get a lambda. If we bring those two together, we get annihilation. Now, in this specific case, the way we're simulating these, it's actually exactly the same as this, but every time we have a number that is not a 5, we replace it with a phi. And every time we have a number that is a 5, we replace it with a lambda. So this would be a 5. This would be a phi and a phi that, when combined, would annihilate. But this would be a phi and a phi, which, when combined, would not. They would become a phi. And let's get this 6 out of the way. This phi, this would be a phi, and this would be a phi, and they would combine to a lambda. So it's basically the same game, but you're given less information. You know when there are 5, so 5 add 5 adds up to 10. Lambdas always annihilate. But with the other ones, you have to think a bit more carefully. Do these belong together or not?
So maybe give us a bit of a background on this, because I mean, meQuanics and the stuff that I work on is very much related to bits and codes. What you're talking about here, we already discussed about QDITs and codes. Now you're talking about something different. You're talking about these anionic models, which is probably what people think of whenever they hear topological quantum computing. So maybe give us a bit of a distinction between the two things.
Yeah, so if you had non-abelian anyons, then you can use these to store information. So if you've got a couple of phi's, for example, here's a couple of phi's, I can use them to store information in that I can take a couple of phi's which annihilate and call that 0, and I can take a couple of phi's which, when combined, would make a lambda, and I can assign that 1, and I can use them to store a qubit. And if I keep them far away from each other, there's no way by looking at this and looking at that to know what would happen when we combined them. So there's no way for local noise to see what we've stored and hence mess it up. So this is a nice way we can store information that is relatively free of errors. We have to keep track of all of the anyons in the background to make sure that they don't mess everything up, but otherwise everything's okay.
I mean, maybe just to elaborate a little bit, is people have never heard of this term before, an anyon. What are these things?
So anyons don't exist in our universe. So, well, we can make them if we have a grid of qubits as we have here, but so we can make them as sort of quasi-particles. They can effectively arise on certain condensed matter systems, but they don't exist in our universe. And the reason for that is we live in a three-dimensional universe, a universe of three spatial dimensions. And that means that topology in three spatial dimensions means that we can't have the kind of properties that anyons allow. And what anyons allow is that, say we had these two, and if we brought them together, they would annihilate. And we have these two, and if we brought them together and annihilate. The kind of properties that we can have with an anyon is if we take this on a walk around the other one, never actually touching it, and bring it back to its original place, then that act of dancing them around each other can change their state, such that if we combine these, they would now become a lambda, and if we combine those, they would now become a lambda. Actually, in this specific model, that doesn't happen. These non-abelian anyons are quite rubbish from a dancing them around each other's perspective, but other non-abelian anyons would do that, and it means that we can do quantum gates. So if we stored a qubit in this one and we stored a qubit in this one, in this pair, so in these two pairs, then we could do quantum gates by doing these sorts of what we call braidings, moving them around each other, or even swapping them with each other. So this is a completely different architecture for quantum computation than you've probably had on your channel before.
Well, I mean, the background for anyonic quantum computing is that it's supposed to be intrinsically robust. So in the case of normal qubit systems, you might need 1,000 or 10,000 qubits, physical atoms or superconducting circuits, in order to encode a single piece of information that can be long-lived. But the point of these anyons is the intrinsic protection.
Yeah. Yeah, they have very nice properties for protection. I think people have oversold the intrinsicness, in that they think that if you just make one of these systems that realizes anyons, then it will be the holy grail and you'll do everything easily. You do still have to keep track of any stray anyons that have been created by noise, and that's what people can contribute to with Decodoku. But they do have a very intrinsic robustness, both for the non-abelian anyons here and for the abelian anyons, such as the ones that are involved in meQuanics as well.
So in the case of when you release this game and other ways that you've tried to communicate and engage with the general public, I mean, what else have you been getting up to on the release of Decodoku?
So yesterday we did an AMA on Reddit. So that's a thing where you go to, so Reddit is a big website, one of the world's most visited websites, and you can go there and ask people anything. So today you can go to the main AMA site and ask Matt Damon anything. But yesterday it was more exciting because you could ask us anything.
And how did that end up going?
We were not on the... Pardon?
How did that end up going?
It was quite good. So we didn't do it on the main AMA site like Matt Damon. We did it on the science part of Reddit. So New Reddit Journal of Science, they call themselves rather grandly here, but it's the science part of Reddit. So this is still fairly high up and so it got 4,000 upvotes, which is quite nice in comparison with maybe others. And as you can see, okay, this is the browser that talks to me in German, so you might have to translate a little bit, but obviously all of the comments are in English. So, yeah, it's 20 hours ago. It's still quite high, and we had many comments. So the amount of comments on here are around 2,000. So we have people asking us about programming quantum computers. So I gave a bit of an answer on that. We have people asking us about big breakthroughs in the field, and it wasn't just me answering. I assembled a team from around Switzerland. So we had my boss, Professor Daniel Loss, one of his postdocs, Dr. Christoph Klöffel. They were talking about things like condensed matter. We had Professor Wootton, who's an experimentalist. Lydia Del Rio is in the group of Renato Renner at ETH Zurich, so she does foundational things. Felix is at Geneva. He does experimental quantum cryptography and whatnot. So there's a lot of, I spent about 8 or 9 hours sitting here answering things. Other people answered things too. So if you want to know about quantum computation, here's another place, or any quantum technology, here's a place to go and read what we said and what other knowledgeable people came and joined in and said.
That's great. So, I mean, we'll link to this obviously down in the description.
Yeah.
People can go take a look. As you said, if there's over 2,000 comments, I'm sure many of the questions that other people would have probably already answered there.
Yeah, and if you add additional questions, then we will try to keep on top of them. We will try, but there are already many.
I try to ask this of everyone that we have on. We're approaching nearly an hour, which is a bit longer than we usually do, but considering we had mic problems, we'll obviously go over a little bit. Where do you see things going within the field in the next 5 or 10 years? Certainly we're getting heavy investment. There is now very strong industry partnerships, whether it's through places like Google or IBM. So from your perspective and from the perspective of people that you talk to in Switzerland, what do you see as the eventual 5 or 10 year goal of this whole entire field?
So from the perspective of me as a quantum error correcting researcher, I would be expecting in the next few years to see increased experiments in surface code, so small proof of principle surface codes that can actually correct all quantum errors. John Martinez's group, as I'm sure you've probably heard from Austin, have done great things, but their experiments currently only protect against bit flip noise and not phase flip noise, as far as I'm aware, which is a great leap forward, but they're going to be now working on an actual surface code that can do both, IBM as well. So that's going to be the main thing that we're going to see soon. Also, from a perspective in Basel, we work a lot on spin qubits. So the march towards making spin qubits a very viable alternative to superconducting qubits is something that's going to happen. And we've got a lot of there's a lot of funding coming in from Intel now, because they're very interested in things that will work with silicon. So spin qubits we can do with silicon. So they're very interested in keeping silicon going, and so there's a lot of money going into that. And I also work with NKIT, which is an alliance of universities in Britain. I should say that I work for QSIT, an alliance of universities in Switzerland, and that's who funds this Decodoku project. But I'm also talking to NKIT, which is in Britain, and they're working on trapped ions. So I'm helping them get towards their what they call Q2020 goal, which is going to be again a small proof of principle quantum error correcting device.
Wonderful. So last question before we is that there anything well, obviously there's something you want to plug. We've been talking about it through the whole conversation with the puzzle itself, but any other projects that you guys are thinking about launching, or maybe are launching in the short term, or student projects or possible ways people can help you out beyond simply playing the game.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just plug the blog a little bit. So the blog is based around the game, but we do have a series of articles on quantum error correction, taking you from the basics of classical error correction all the way up to the specific science behind our game. And it's written so that it would be accessible to a wide audience. So you don't just have to play our game. If you want to learn something about quantum error correction, you can check out our blog, and it will tell you about surface codes. So there's a big series on the toric code and other surface codes. So if you want to know the science behind Decodoku, come to our blog. If you want to know the science behind meQuanics, come to our blog too. And of
wonderful.
course, everything you do.
Okay, so I think that's probably it for today. I do apologise for the mic troubles. I'll obviously spend a bit of time and try and clean it up and make it a bit easier to listen to and possibly upload the YouTube version, obviously, with our podcast versions. For those of you...
someone to buy me a new MacBook.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the problem is. We have had it before. It could just be a Google thing for all I know. It might not necessarily be your computer. But aside from that, we will try to upload a new version of this to YouTube and the podcast versions, because obviously we were looking at a bit of a demonstration from James. And so just listening to this might be a bit tricky without the visuals to help out. But we'll try and do our first sort of video podcast upload as well. And obviously these days with Androids and iOS devices, people should be able to watch it as well as listen to it. But I'll see what I can do in the next week in order to make this a worthwhile experience for people to download and listen to the project from Switzerland. So James, thanks again for joining us. And thanks, best of luck with the puzzle and with the whole project itself.
Yep, and best of luck with meQuanics. We should work together because we're basically doing the same thing.
Yes,
so,
very much.
We'll keep in touch, and maybe there'll be a few more videos with us.
Yeah, great. No, that sounds like a good plan.
Okay, great.
Great. Thanks a lot again, and thank you all for joining us. So thank you, and I'll try and re-upload this within the week. So thanks again.